Deep in the Colorado Rockies, December's end brought 1881 to a bitter close. Icy gusts carved through the towering pines like frozen daggers while snowflakes danced wildly along the mountain peaks. Nathaniel Briggs emerged onto his cabin's weathered deck, pulling his threadbare woolen jacket closer as he squinted into the swirling white chaos. 3 long seasons had passed since he'd chosen this remote existence. The quietude was his companion, now no curious neighbors, no prying conversations. 7 days prior, correspondence had found its way to him, wrapped in protective oilcloth. The message bore faded but readable script. Appropriate household assistance secured per your inquiry. Expected arrival before month's conclusion, conditions allowing. Responsibilities include meal preparation, general maintenance, and frontier duties. Payment received in full. No exchanges permitted post-arrival. He'd requested capability over beauty, silence over conversation, someone resilient enough to endure Colorado's harsh embrace. What he hadn't anticipated was her arrival during nature's fury, and definitely not in her condition. Through the curtain of falling snow, he glimpsed a figure struggling up the rocky slope, carrying a cloth bag across one arm while clutching another bundle clothes. As she approached within view, Nathaniel's expression darkened. Her condition was undeniable. She ascended the wooden steps with measured effort, each exhale creating visible clouds in the Arctic air. Ice crystals adorned her traveling cloak and worn boots, yet her gaze mysterious and determined remained locked on his. "Any refund requests must wait for warmer weather," she declared, her words firm despite trembling limbs. "I refuse to venture back into this tempest." Nathaniel's expression hardened. His stare shifted between her rounded middle and her resolute face. "My payment wasn't for 2, he stated coldly. "Nobody requested your investment in both," she countered. "Yet he arrives regardless." The mountain wind shrieked around them. She remained unwavering. After several tense moments, Nathaniel spoke no words, simply reached for her traveling bag, lifted it with unexpected care, and retreated inside. She paused, then entered behind him. The interior held scents of burning wood, evergreen and forgotten stew. Dying coals glowed dimly in the stone fireplace. A simple cot occupied one corner while a rough-hewn table claimed another, surrounded by shelves bearing containers, implements, and neglected volumes. Nathaniel positioned her belongings beside the hearth, then silently added fresh timber to the flames. Fire bloomed gradually, painting the crude walls with dancing shadows. He finally faced her. "Evening meal in 2 hours," he announced. "Rest until then." She offered no gratitude, merely acknowledged with a nod, peeled away her ice-encrusted wrap with stiff movements, and approached the warmth. Nathaniel observed as she extended one palm toward the flames while her other hand rested protectively on her swollen form. Her features appeared more angular than anticipated, sharp around the temples, lips compressed into an expression familiar with solitude over joy. He moved past her, retrieved a folded covering from a nearby seat, and tossed it toward the distant sleeping area. "That bed belongs to you now," he grumbled. Again she nodded, lowering herself carefully with a slight grimace. Nathaniel crossed to the food storage, examined the cooking pot, ladled portions for reheating, and stoked the flames beneath. Beyond the walls, wind wailed like ancient spirits through the forest. Within, 2 strangers occupied the hushed world of descending snow, neither anticipating mercy, yet both perhaps too weary to continue denying it. January crawled by with painful slowness. Snow accumulated on the cabin's edges like a secondary roof, while the wind maintained its relentless chorus. Inside, she labored without protest, sweeping floors, preparing vegetables for meals, washing fabrics in the rear chamber. Her movements stayed careful yet confident. Even as her belly expanded, she never requested assistance, never mentioned the persistent aches or the cold that settled deep in her bones. Nathaniel observed her during quiet intervals from the porch over morning coffee through gaps in the barn entrance. Smiles never graced her features, yet her hands moved as though remembering happier times. He'd given her the smaller back room, cramped but heated. She maintained it spotlessly, though she brought no personal touches. No portraits, no mementos only. Bundled garments and a weathered Bible, she kept silent. Conversation remained sparse. Occasionally during supper she'd inquire, "Preference for potatoes or bread?" His response, a grunt of "whatever's easier." Sometimes he'd mention, "Chickens seem thin," prompting her wordless nod and immediate action. It was frigid peace, genuine tranquility nonetheless, until one evening. In the profound quiet between settling logs and creaking timbers, Nathaniel detected it. A stifled weeping, barely audible. He froze, axe suspended mid-swing beside the fireplace. The sound repeated from behind her door, a single, broken cry. Escaping against her will, he didn't knock. Instead, he moved quietly to the corridor, fed additional wood into the nearby stove, and left a metal cup of heated water on the floor. Then he returned to his seat and remained motionless until dawn, when she woke. The fire burned brightly. The empty cup rested near her bedside. But what stole her breath was the shawl, her thick woolen covering, previously stained from travel and kitchen work, now clean and folded precisely at her bed's foot. She entered the kitchen where Nathaniel already tended the flames. She stood momentarily, arms folded. "Kindness isn't required," she said softly. He didn't turn. "I'm not kind," he replied after hesitation. "Just proper. There's distinction." She studied him with an unreadable expression, then nodded once and returned to prepare breakfast that evening. Returning to her room, she discovered something additional. An aged leather-bound volume with a cracked spine but pristine pages, a medical reference book. Inside, a torn paper fragment marked a section midway through. Childbirth preparation, positioning, complications, and alternative assistance. She stood beside the bed for extended moments, holding the book against her heart. She didn't knock on his door or voice appreciation, but when she served his meal that night, she placed it with gentle, almost reverent care, and for the first time sat opposite him. Neither spoke, yet they dined together, the wind moaning against the glass while something invisible began transforming. Like frozen ground cracking beneath the surface, winter's grip slowly weakened. Mud traced paths through the front entrance, which she cleaned each morning before lighting the fire. Never once did she complain. Nathaniel noticed her hands had grown steadier, her steps more certain despite her expanding form. She still took meals quietly, but occasionally their eyes would meet across the table now, and neither looked away. One evening, as wind battered the windows, she remained longer by the stove after dinner. Nathaniel sat whittling near the hearth, crafting kindling with deliberate, careful strokes. She settled across from him, hands folded. "My husband perished in a work camp," she said gently. Nathaniel paused, blade suspended. He didn't look up yet, simply waited. "It wasn't combat," she continued. "They arrested him over nothing. Claimed he'd stolen grain. We both knew otherwise. He was defending me from a guard's advances." Nathaniel set aside his knife. He struck. The man wants a single blow. They seized him that evening. By morning, I learned they'd beaten him until his ribs shattered. Internal injuries, they reported. Never allowed me to see him, just handed me his wedding band wrapped in cloth. Her voice wavered but held firm. "That tale haunts me still, even here." The only sound was crackling pine in the hearth. Nathaniel returned to his seat and gazed into the flames. "Those kinds of memories have teeth," he said. "They don't release easily. But up here, at least, they can't pursue as quickly." She smiled, faintly grateful yet exhausted. Days continued. A traveling trader arrived with goods and gossip. While bartering for essentials, Nathaniel noticed the merchant's lingering glances toward her. "The Kansas widow?" he inquired of the townspeople later. "The one whose man died in that camp?" Thought she'd disappeared. By the following market day, rumors trailed them like smoke. Nathaniel remained steady when he heard them, but entering the tavern, he did so with squared shoulders and his hat pushed back. "She's employed by me," he announced clearly, his voice like distant thunder before a storm. "She's under my protection." "Seeking trouble?" "Directed toward me?" Silence answered. None was needed. That evening, Nathaniel prepared her horse outside the barn, adjusting the seat and wrapping it in thick wool, his mother's blanket, once kept in a chest by her bed. When she came to help with feeding, she noticed the additional padding. "You're riding tomorrow," he said. "Journey should be comfortable." She examined the blanket, then him. "This wasn't necessary." "I understand," he said. She touched the wool's edge, tracing the woven design. "Thank you." Nathaniel nodded once and returned to his tasks, though unspoken. When wind raged outside and cold crept beneath doors, he began lighting fires earlier. He left kindling beside her room, filled the water kettle before she asked, and positioned her boots near the stove, not from obligation anymore, but something deeper, something resembling affection. In response, she began leaving the lantern glowing by the window when he returned late from town. Their words stayed minimal, but their silences transformed from heavy to comfortable. They'd evolved beyond strangers, not yet love, but approaching it, spring arrived hesitantly, unsure of its welcome. Frost began releasing the earth while streams flowed fuller, carrying winter's remnants downstream. Snow melted from the cabin's roof in steady droplets, like time itself thawing. Sunlight lingered longer daily, casting warm golden rays across the rough kitchen floor, illuminating suspended dust particles. Her movements had slowed significantly. Her belly had become round and firm, stretching beneath her apron like an unfulfilled promise. Still, she worked when permitted, slicing herbs with deliberate fingers, kneading dough between labored breaths, folding laundry in quiet, precise stacks. Each action carried the rhythm of someone accustomed to bearing weight without spillage, yet pain was present. One afternoon, bending for kindling, she froze halfway up, pressing her hand firmly into her lower back, features contorting with discomfort. Nathaniel observed from the porch, hammer motionless. He didn't call out or rush to assist, but the following morning she discovered a low stool positioned beside the washing basin, angled perfectly for seated work. She studied it momentarily, then sat with a quiet sigh. No thanks were given. He never mentioned it. But their silence grew gentler, less fragile. Days later, while Nathaniel repaired the chicken enclosure, her voice carried through the open air. "I require assistance." No shouting, no desperation, just honesty, as if seeking help had become necessity rather than weakness. Nathaniel dropped his hammer and turned. She stood at the rear steps, one hand on the frame, the other holding a small paper. He cleaned sawdust from his palms on his pants. "Certainly." She approached and handed him the list written in tight pencil on torn envelope. Though smudged, words were clear: blankets, sterilized cord, cotton fabric, shears. She indicated the final item. "Those need sanitizing. Boiled. Ask the midwife about duration." He raised his eyebrows. "Midwife in town. Clara Mertz, large woman with rope-thick braids. Tell her I'm due late May." Nathaniel nodded curtly and pocketed the paper. He departed before sunset, returning the next day with bulging saddlebags filled with soft cotton diapers, muslin wrappings, medicinal oil, and a worn guidebook titled The Frontier Woman's Childbirth Manual. He placed nothing directly in her hands, simply left the bundle on the table. That evening, she passed through the kitchen and stopped. Nathaniel sat hunched under lamplight, flannel spread before him. He gripped small scissors, tongue pressed to his lip in concentration while attempting to cut even fabric strips. She leaned silently against the doorframe, observing. "Why all this effort?" Her voice was soft, without accusation. He didn't look up initially. When he did, his eyes were dark and quiet. "I once buried a son," he said simply. "Couldn't do anything for him then?" "This time will be different." She stood there momentarily, hand gripping the wood. "What occurred?" "Fever. 3 days took him." His mother followed soon after. She walked slowly into the room and sat opposite him, hands folded. "I'm sorry," he nodded, focusing on the fabric, "as am I." The following morning brought another discovery. A tiny cradle swing hung from a ceiling beam near the window cedar, smoothed and bound with thick rope. The lining was soft wool, carefully sewn by inexperienced but devoted hands. It swayed gently in the morning air, sunlight dappling the cloth. She stepped forward, fingers brushing the cradle's rim. She remained silent, but her eyes glistened in the light, and her breath caught once the kind of sound carrying more meaning than words. The tempest descended rapidly, a wall of wind. snow, and electricity that struck the cabin with unprecedented fury. By nightfall, shutters clattered like rattling bones while the chimney wailed like a wounded creature. She doubled over by the stove just after midnight. Her breathing faltered, then came the sharp intake. Nathaniel glanced up from his book and understood immediately. She gripped the table edge. "It's happening," she gasped. "Now?" He said, half rising. She confirmed with a single nod. No time for Clara, no possibility of crossing the ridge in this blizzard. Nathaniel cleared the table in one motion, scattering salt and flour, then ran for blankets. The guidebook tumbled to the floor. He retrieved it, flipping to his marked page with shaking hands. He'd studied those words countless times. Now they seemed written in an unknown language. She cried out, face pale, hand clenching the bed frame's wooden rail like her sole anchor. "You'll survive this," he muttered. "You hear me? Just breathe." Initially, she didn't scream, but her expression twisted with bone-breaking agony. Hours blended together. Perspiration streamed down her forehead. Damp hair clung to her face in dark strands. Nathaniel did everything possible, boiled water, supported her, changed cloths, cooled her brow. But when the critical moment arrived, she screamed. "Push!" he shouted, voice breaking. "Push! He's nearly here!" Her cry shattered through the cabin like thunder. Then came the stillness, a silence, so profound it echoed in his ears. The child emerged, small, covered in birth fluids, motionless. She collapsed backward, eyes fluttering, chest heaving. But the infant made no sound. Nathaniel froze, then dropped to his knees, terror flooding his veins. He turned the baby over, patted the tiny back. Nothing. He flipped to the instructions. "Clear the breathing passages," it read. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the boy. He bent low, placed his mouth to the baby's, and drew out. The fluid, warm, bitter liquid filled his throat. He spat it aside, gagging, then repeated the action. The baby jerked, then coughed. Then a cry, faint, trembling, but a cry nonetheless. Nathaniel nearly fainted. He wrapped the boy in clean fabric, placed him on her chest, and collapsed on the cold floor. Drenched in sweat, trembling uncontrollably, his hands bore blisters from the hot water vessel. His knees ached, his stomach churned from the lingering taste, but the boy lived, and her fingers moved weakly, stroking the child's face. The crisis had passed, yet Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He remained by the stove, watching embers fade, his weather-beaten skin stinging. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, throat raw from shouting. The baby stirred once. She slept, lips slightly parted, one hand still curved around the boy's tiny fingers. Nathaniel rose, stepped outside despite the cold, and returned with aged pine. He carved by lamplight, slow and purposeful. M-I-C-A-H. He traced the name with his fingers, the same he'd carved years before, but this time the letters felt different, alive. The storm had departed, leaving strange, aching calm. The mountains stood silent under a pewter sky, the cabin half buried in accumulated snow. Inside, fire burned low, casting gentle amber light across the timber walls. She awakened gradually. The ache in her body ran deep but not sharp, just hollow. Her limbs weighted, breathing shallow, yet she was warm, and something small and soft stirred nearby. She turned her head. Nathaniel occupied the rocking chair, wrapped in an aged quilt. In his arms, little Micah slumbered, tiny fists tucked beneath his chin. Nathaniel rocked gently, unaware of her attention, and he was humming not loudly or clearly, but enough. His voice cracked from fatigue, low and rough like grinding stone. Struggling with the melody. It was an ancient tune, something from the south, something a father might hum when darkness fell and he believed nobody listened. She watched, breath trapped in her throat. The way Nathaniel regarded the child, filled with wonder and fear and something too precious to name. It emptied something within her, then filled it again. When he noticed her watching, he straightened. "You should be sleeping," he said quietly. "I was," she whispered. "Then I heard the music." He looked away, embarrassed. "Didn't intend to disturb." "You," she smiled weakly, voice hoarse. "You didn't." It was beautiful, a pause thick with unspoken thoughts. Then her voice penetrated the quiet. "You're more of a father than he ever could have been." Nathaniel gazed down at the baby. Perhaps, he said after a long moment. His eyes moistened, but he didn't blink. Or perhaps I simply learned eventually. Her expression softened without pity, only truth that afternoon. While she rested, Nathaniel worked clumsily with something in his lap, a tangle of blue yarn, rough, frayed, and chaotic. He muttered frustrations under his breath, but persisted, threading and looping as best possible. His fingers were too thick. The yarn escaped constantly, yet he continued. Hours later, he completed it, barely. The shape was uneven, the stitching irregular, but it was a hat crooked, strangely formed, but a hat nonetheless. He placed it on the table beside the cradle, then turned to check the water. She woke to the aroma of stew, blinked slowly, sat up, and reached for Micah, who now wore the hat or what resembled one. She froze, squinted, then burst into laughter. It erupted from her, sudden and complete, the sound warm and surprised and vital. Nathaniel turned. What's amusing? She held up the hat. This, she said between giggles. This tragic hat. It's absolutely dreadful. He crossed his arms, feigning offense. Well, I'm no craftsman. Certainly not, she teased, still grinning. It resembles 3 different hats attempting to be one. He chuckled, rubbing his neck. But it serves its purpose. She truly looked at him, really examined him, and smiled broader. Yes, she said, it does. Without thinking, she reached out and grasped his hand, squeezing once. In that moment, the burden of loss and storm and silence lifted slightly. In that imperfect, wonderful hat, with a peacefully sleeping baby and a gently burning fire, laughter finally arrived. The healing had begun. If this tale moved something within you, if it reminded you that restoration can arrive wrapped in humble fabric and quiet moments, that love sometimes enters through the rear door wearing muddy boots and carrying a crying child, then remain with us. Subscribe to Wild West Echoes for more chronicles of courage, mercy, and the kind of love that flourishes where nothing else survives. More adventures await, and you won't want to miss what unfolds next on the frontier.